I've set up some HTML to display a notification bar. I've also added some basic styles to add border, margin, and padding. If I add an empty notification bar using div class of alert, you'll see that the notification bar renders with margin, with background color, and padding and all of this. Using the empty pseudoclass, we can target the alert notification bar by saying alert empty. And inside of that CSS block, we can just say display none. And you'll see that the empty notification bar disappears. Instead of targeting the alert class twice, we can chain multiple pseudoclasses together. So I'll comment this block out. I'll come back to the original block and I can say not, and then inside of the not selector, I'll say empty. This way, any element with the class of alert that is not empty will receive these following styles. Let's start by targeting the first paragraph tag in the article by saying article p a pseudoclass of first of type. Now I'll add a font size, font style. And now the first paragraph of our article looks more like an introduction. Similarly, we can target the last instance of an element. This time, let's select the last image in the article by saying article image and add the last of type pseudoclass. And to it, I'll just add a border. We can see that the border was applied. Now let's try targeting the only block quote element in this post by writing block quote and giving it the pseudoclass of only of type. And I'll go ahead and add some styles to it as well. And now you can see those styles were applied to the only block quote in this post. Let's say we wanted to select all of the odd index paragraph tags. We'll do that by targeting article p nth of type. I'm going to give it the keyword of odd. The color to something like maroon. Now as I scroll through the post, you'll see every odd indexed paragraph tag has a different color. Nth of type takes keywords, it takes values, or even a formula. So I'll change nth of type to, let's say, 3. And this will highlight just the third paragraph tag inside of the article. But let's say we wanted to choose every third paragraph tag instead of just the third. Now you can see every third paragraph tag has a different color. Let's take this one step further, and I'll select every fourth paragraph tag starting at the third paragraph tag by typing nth of type 4n plus 3. Now starting at the third paragraph tag, so 1, 2, 3, I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, it has a color, and now it resets, so 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph tag, notice it skipped the block quote, 1, 2, 3, now we're going to skip the image, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's start out by targeting the main element, and we'll set its margin left property to 5 rem, and this 5 rem equals the width of the nav element. And now for the width, let's type width, and we'll set that to a calc function of 100% minus 25 rem. And here the 25 rem comes from the 5 rem width of the nav element plus the 20 rem width of the aside element. And now when I resize my window, the main element is still positioned in the correct location, and it grows and shrinks depending on the remaining available space. We can take this one step further by repeating this pattern inside of a media query to ensure that the layout functions properly even when the elements change size. So if I resize my window, the nav and aside elements shrink, and the main element continues to take up the remaining space thanks to the calc function. Let's start by adding a div with a class of box, and inside of it, I'll add some text. In our CSS, let's target the box class and add a background color. Now I'll add a width of 60 VW or 60 viewport width units, which effectively means 60% of the width of the viewport no matter the content inside. Next, I'll add a height of 40 VH, which is the same thing as VW, except now we're looking at viewport height units. Resizing my browser, you can see the box changes in relation to the size of the viewport. We can center this div by adding some margin to it. So we're aiming to get the total number of width plus margin equals 100%. So if I set a margin and give it a value of 30 VH, 20 VW, this margin shorthand reads margin top, right, bottom, left. So we're setting 30 viewport height margin on the top and bottom for a total of 60 VH, plus the 40 VH height of the box for a total of 100 VH. The same applies for the math on the width. Let's take what we now know about viewport units to create something like a page with full screen scrolling background sections. I've added a few section elements along with some text. I've got a few demo styles already configured. And now I'll target the section element. And I'll give it a width of 100 viewport width units. And I'll give it a height of 100 viewport height units. Next, I'll add some code that centers the text in each section, as well as provides some text styles. Now, I'll add a few background properties to stretch and attach a background image into each section. Finally, I'll target each section and add a background image to it. Now we have scrolling, full screen, fixed background sections that respond to the window resizing with no math and no JavaScript. I have a color that is set on the body element, which is being overridden by this button selector that has a number of styles defined at the global level. I need to override the button styles when a button is inside of a section element. So I'll start by targeting a section button. And I want to use the color that is set on the body, not the global button style. Instead of adding a color property and using the same value already set on the body, I'll set color to a value of unset. This value effectively sets the color of the button to inherit from its parent, which is a section element. Since I haven't defined any styles for a section, it inherits from the body element, giving the button the same color as the body. In the case where there are no parent styles to fall back to, or if the CSS property does not inherit, for example, a margin, unset works by resetting properties back to the browser default. I'll set font size to unset. And since neither section nor body have a font size specified, the button will apply the browser default font size. Set up a demo of a footer with a number of links in it like you might see on a news website. So on my nav element, say column count, and this just takes an integer such as 4. And when set, it says render 4 columns no matter the width of the containing element. So if I resize my browser, the links remain in 4 columns, no matter how squished or spread out that they become. Next, let's take a look at column width. So it takes a length value set in pixels, rems, ems, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to set it to 250 pixels. Now when I resize my browser, still got 4 columns, and they're taking up at least 150 pixels. But when I shrink it down and they can no longer take up 150 pixels, it will actually start collapsing the number of columns down so that it can make enough room for them. We can combine these first two properties into a shorthand columns. So I'll comment these out. And now I can just say columns, and I want 4 150 pixels. Essentially, it says render up to 4 columns that are at least 150 pixels wide. Another property available is column gap. And column gap specifies the gap or gutter between each column and takes a non-negative length set in pixels, rems, ems, again, percentages, whatever you like. So I'm going to set this to 3 rem. I like to think of column gap as built-in padding between columns without having to do really any math to get the spacing right. So now you'll see that the gap between each column is 3 rem. That, coupled with the minimum width of 150 pixels set before, will alter how many columns can fit within the window at a certain time, and will adjust the content of the columns accordingly. Next, we can look at column rule, which allows you to put a border between each column. And it takes the same arguments as border shorthand would. So we could say something like 1 pixel dashed CCC, and you'll see that a vertical border was added at the boundary of each column. One nice thing about column rule is it doesn't render a rule to the left of the first column or to the right of the last column, even if I resize my browser. So if I resize it down, it's going to drop that last rule. And if I resize it up, it's going to add an extra one, but it never adds them on the edges, which is really nice. Finally, we can look at a couple of properties with varying browser support. First, column span. I could say column span all. And what that's going to do is make the H2 take up all of the column width and force a line break to make all of the columns start after it. Finally, let's look at column fill. By default, it's set to balance, which means try to equal out the content between each column. You can change this to auto, which will fill content as much as it can in one column, then flow into the next, and if there's any remaining, it will go into the next, and so on and so forth. I'll start by selecting the image, and I'll set its width to 90 viewport width units, and I'll set its height to 75 viewport height units. I'll also add a border so that we can see its boundaries clearly. Now let's set object fit to its default value of fill. And fill is going to stretch the image regardless of its aspect ratio to fill the container. Next, I'll change object fit to a value of contain. And this will increase or decrease the image size to fill the box, but it won't change the aspect ratio. So you'll see the empty space here at the top and the bottom of the container, confirming that the aspect ratio of the image itself hasn't changed. Now I'll change object fit to a value of cover. This might be the most useful value for object fit, and it tells the image to fill the height and width of its container and maintain its aspect ratio. So if necessary, the image will be cropped to fit to the container size, which you can see when I resize my browser down. You'll see the sides of the image being cut off, but the main part of the image keeps its aspect ratio. You can also set object fit to none, which just tells the image to keep its original size. The last value we can set to object fit is scale -down, which will use either none or contain, whichever one outputs the smallest dimensions of the image. Let's set the object fit value back to cover, and now we'll look at object position. So this property works in the same way as background position, allowing you to move the image around inside of its container. So by default, object position has a value of 50%, 50%, or the exact center of the container. So let's change this to something like 20 pixels and 10 pixels. And this says set the top left of the image to the 20 pixels from the left edge of the container and 10 pixels from the top edge.